This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so today's topic is vegetarianism. And is that a Jewish concept? Is it a non-Jewish concept? Is it an anti-Jewish concept? Just one second, I apologize. Um, how does Judaism approach it? And actually, it's very interesting to note, as we'll see some sources in a moment, that there was a period of time where mankind was commanded to be vegetarian. So is that something that we will return to? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it something that a person might have their own added sensitivity and that is good, right? And in general, when it comes to these things, well, we'll see. The general idea is that one should not feel that I am more moral than the Torah. I am more moral than God. The Torah allows this, but a person can say that there are situations in Torah. Nazir is an example. Nazir, a person takes a Nazirite vow, then the person is accepting upon themselves some additional things. And the view is that this is not something that the Torah, God wanted to command to everyone, but it is a step up, added level sensitivity. And if a person wants to ascribe to that, then it is to be commended. So let's see where vegetarianism fits in. We'll see if this will be 1 week or 2 weeks that we will devote to this. But let's start with the sources in the Torah itself, where we have this idea of what we can and cannot eat. And certainly, of course, we're very familiar that Judaism has many kashrut standards. And it'll be interesting to see how that changed at different points in our history. It changed from the time of Adam to the time of Noah, and it changed from the time that we were in the desert until the time that we entered into the land of Israel. So let's start with that. Let's see these different points and let's contrast. So in the very beginning of Bereshit, which you should have there on the screen visible, let me make sure. Good. Okay, I'll need to slide it down in a moment. Well, let me slide down a little bit now, so we'll be good to go already. Yeah, good. Okay. Vayomer Elokim. And Elokim, God said, Hine natati lachem, speaking, this is chapter 1, speaking to Adam and Eve. Natati lachem et kol esev, zoreya zera, all seed-bearing herbs, asher al pnei chol haaretz, on the face of the earth, v'et kol ha'etz, and all the trees, asher bo pri eitz, which have fruits, zoreya zera, meaning it's seed-bearing fruits, lachem yiheh liachla. That is what is given to you for consumption. So what was Adam allowed to eat? The vegetables and the fruits. Ulechol chayat haaretz, and to all the beasts of the earth. Ulechol ov hashamayim, and all the birds of the heaven. Ulechol rameis haaretz, all that swarms on the earth. Asher bo nefesh chaya, which has in it their living spirit. Et kol yerek esev la'achla. I've given all the green herbs to eat. Vayihi chen. And it was so. So conspicuously absent from the diet that was given to mankind are animals. But let's hear how Rashi typifies this, qualifies this, explains this. Rashi learns, our second source there, Lachem yiyeh liachla ulechol chayat haaretz, right? The first verse, verse 29, ended off, this will be yours for food. and verse 30 begins, and to all the beasts of the earth. So Rashi's heading takes the last words of verse 29 and the first words of verse 30 and says, why was it arranged in such a fashion? To teach us, Hishva lahem behemot v'chayot l'ma'achal, that God equated mankind, human beings, with the animals and the beasts in terms of what they could eat. V'lo hirsha la'adamu l'ishto lahamit bria v'lechol basar. Oh, interesting. Rashi says it was not given, permission was not given to man, to Adam and his wife, to kill an animal and to eat its flesh. Ach kol yerek Esav, but all the herbs of the field, yochlu yachad kulam, that they would all eat together. Ukeshabo v'nei Noach, but once the b'nei Noach came along, the sons of Noach, hitir lahem basar, then the basar, the meat, was permitted to them. Shenemar, as it says, we'll see that verse soon. Kol remes asher hu chai ki yerek Esav, all that which is alive that swarms, like the herbs sheitarti that I permitted to Adam Arishon, to Adam, natati lachem et kol, to you Noach, I'm giving it all. I'll have to understand why would there be such a change. But before we get to that, let's be what's called medayik. Let's be very carefully specific in the words of Rashi. What did Rashi say is not permitted to do? What did Rashi prohibit? Someone open your mic and answer me. According to Rashi, what specifically was prohibited? Judy?
Lahamit bria.
Good. To kill an animal and to eat it. But if it was, you'll pardon me, some roadkill, right? If they didn't kill the animal, but the animal was dead, according to Rashi, it would follow, it seems, that would be allowed. So according to Rashi, it seems, it would not be correct to say that Adam and Eve were vegetarians or vegans, right? They were allowed to eat animals, but they were not allowed to kill an animal in order to eat its flesh. But if it did not come through their killing an animal, then they would be allowed to eat the flesh. This actually is laid out very clearly in the Tosafot, which is the next source that I have there, but not translated. But I'll read and explain to you. And Tosafot also brings a proof for this view. Tosafot says, Achol tochal v'lo ever min achai. We have our 7 mitzvot, referred to as the 7 Noahide mitzvot, which will deal with why they the 7 Noahide mitzvot and not the mitzvot of Adam and Eve. But we have the 7 Noahide mitzvot, which applies to all of mankind. And there are many, many non-Jews who believe in the Torah and have, for whatever reason, decided not to go further with a conversion, but they are Noahides. And if you'll Google, you'll see many, many, many websites dedicated to helping Noahides live their life as a proper Noahide. A Noahide is someone who's keeping the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide mitzvot, which according to Tosfot, all of them applied also to Adam, but many of them were only first written when it comes to Noach, and that's why they're called the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide mitzvot. And we might dedicate at some point a class, a lunch and learn, to the 7 Noahide mitzvot, because it's a very, very interesting topic to see what they are and where they take us. But Tosfot points out, you can eat. Now, one of the 7 mitzvot, Bnei Noach, is not to eat a limb from a living animal, called Aver, a limb, Minachai, Aver Minachai, a limb from a living animal. So Tosfot says, V'hadam rina lekaman, that we'll say later on in the Talmud that he's quoting, that he's speaking on, Jelo hutar la'adam arishon basar la'achila, that meat was not permitted to Adam. Hainu, that is only lahamit v'le'achol. What was prohibited to Adam? Lahamit, to kill an animal, v'le'achol, and then to eat it. Aval meta me'eleha sharia. But if it died on its own, not through any intervention on the part of mankind, it would be permitted. And it's coming to say, but if it comes to exclude a limb from a living animal, even if he didn't bring that about, even if mankind did not bring that about, nevertheless, if it fell off from the animal, it became disconnected from the animal while the animal was alive, then it is asur, it is prohibited. In other words, what's bothering Tosfot is as follows. If you're going to say that all meat is prohibited, then how do we understand one of these 7 Noahide commandments of not eating Aver Minachai, not eating a limb from a living animal? I can't eat any meat. So why specify this type of meat? If it's a limb that fell off from the animal while it was alive, you can't eat. That clearly tells me that meat can be eaten, but not this meat. But meat is not completely, literally and figuratively off the table over here. And that's why there's a need to specify, but a limb from a living animal, that you cannot have. So according to the way Rashi is understanding the verses, and according to the way the Tosafot is understanding the verses, what it's telling us is, mankind, you cannot kill an animal and eat it. But without your intervention, if it dies, you are allowed to eat it. But a limb that came off from a living animal, even though it was not with your intervention, even that you're not allowed to eat. That is how Rashi learns. That is how Tosfot learns. So if we were to ask, were Adam and Eve vegetarians? Was mankind vegetarian until the time of Noach? The answer is no. They were not allowed to kill an animal and eat it, but if it died by itself, and they're not allowed to eat a limb that came off from a living animal by itself, but if an animal died not through their intervention, then they could eat that meat. Tosfot is basing his proof on the fact that, on his understanding, I should say, that all 7 mitzvot applied also to Adam and Eve, to those generations. So why are they called the 7 Noahide mitzvot? Well, all mankind came out from Noach, and therefore, and many of them were only spelled out when it came to Noach. That's why they are referred to as the 7 Noahide mitzvot. But in fact, they all applied already from the time of Adam and Eve. Rambam, Maimonides, that we'll see in a moment, and Ramban, who I don't have on the sheet, but also will chime in, he has a different approach. He has a different approach when it comes to the 7 Noahide mitzvot that then undermines the proof that Tosafot brought. Let me make sure we're still good in terms of the sheet here. Yes. Okay. So we have here Rambam. I can't really give you both the Hebrew and English at the same time. So let me start with the Hebrew, and then we'll work out, and you'll have the English in front of you also. Rambam says, Al Shisha Dvarim Nitztava Adam Arishon. There were 6 commandments that were given. Actually, you know what? Let me share the Hebrew. Let me share the English with you, and I'll read the Hebrew. I think that will make more sense. Here, okay? Over here, the 6 precepts. Okay, I'll read the Hebrew and translate to English that you have in front of you. Al Shisha Dvarim Nitztava Adam Arishon. 6 things. There were 6 mitzvot that were given to Adam. Al Avodah Zarah, the prohibition against idolatry. Al Birkat Hashem, cursing out God. Al Shvichut Damim, on murder. Gilui Arayat, incest, adultery. Al Hagezel, thievery, robbery. 5 don'ts. The Al Hadinim, and 1 do. What was the 1 do? Set up a court system, a proper, just, a system of justice with courts to maintain the proper flow of society. Even though we've received all of these from Moses, Vadat notelehen, and it's logical, our understanding follows it. It's logical understanding. Yiresh al elon itztaveh. It seems these were already commanded to Adam and Eve. Hosif lenoach ever min achai. And to Noach was added on an additional one, namely, Ever min achai, not eating the limb from a live animal. Shenemar, as it says, Ach basa b'nafsho damolo tochlu, the flesh b'nafsho, while it is with its life, that you cannot eat. V'nimtzu sheva mitzvot. And that's how we reach our tally of 7 mitzvot. Then it's a little bit of history, and then we'll double back to the point here. The Rama and that's what applied to the entire world. Ad Avraham, until the time of Abraham. Ba Avraham, Avram came v'nitztaveh yetrol eila b'mila. He was commanded, in addition to this, circumcision. Huid palel shacharit, and he instituted the prayer, the morning prayer, shacharit. V'yitzchak, along came Isaac. Hifrish maser, he started the idea of tithing, giving portions of what Hashem gives us back to God, to others. V'hosif tefilot acheret lifnot hayom, and he added on an additional tefillah, prayer, towards the end of the day, what we call mincha. Yaakov, along came Yaakov, Jacob. Hosif gid hanasha, he added on the prohibition against eating the gid hanasha, the sciatica nerve as it runs through the back of the leg of the animal. Vitpalel arvit, and he prayed and instituted evening prayers, what we call mariv or arvit. Uvemitzrayim nitztaveh Amram b'mitzvot yiterot, and in Egypt, Amram, Moses' father, was commanded additional mitzvot. Ad sheba Moshe Rabbeinu, until Moshe came along, v'nishlama Torah al yado, and the Torah was completed through him. So now, according to Rambam, Adam was not commanded to not eat from the limb of a live animal. Now, Ramban, Nachmanides, learns differently than Rashi. If we go back to our original psukim, he learns differently than Rashi. He said, what was given to mankind to eat? I gave you the herbs and the fruits of the tree, not meat. according to Ramban, whether you kill it or not is irrelevant. Meat was not given to you. What was given to the animals? Verse 30, and to all the beasts of the earth, I've given what? The herbs. What is left out of the animals list? What's not included for the animals?
The fruit from the tree.
The fruit from the tree. So Ramban argues with Rashi and says they were never equalized. So he argues with Rashi on 2 points. Rashi said mankind and the animals were given the fruits and the vegetables, and mankind could also eat meat as long as it wasn't slaughtered, as long as it wasn't killed by mankind, as long as it's not a limb from a living animal. Ramban says no and no. Mankind was never allowed to eat meat at all. Whether they killed it, whether it died through another means. Mankind was given 2 categories, the herbs, the vegetables, and the fruits of the tree. The animals on a lower level were given only the herbs, not the fruits of the trees. And according to the way Rambam, Maimonides that we just saw, the Tosfot's whole proof falls off. Tosfot's whole proof was, well, if Adam was commanded not to eat the limb of a living animal, it means he must be eating meat. Otherwise, if he's not eating meat at all, why specify the limb of a living animal? And Ramban would say, you've got it wrong. In fact, Adam was not commanded about the limb of a living animal. There was no need to. Adam was not allowed to eat meat at all. Only 6 mitzvot were given to Adam. The 7th one, about the limb of a living animal, that was only given to Noach. Once meat was allowed to be eaten, then there was this restriction of not eating the limb that fell off from a living animal. But before Noach, where meat was absolutely prohibited, there was no reason to prohibit the limb of a living animal. And according to that approach, that's why it is referred to as the 7 Noahide mitzvot. It's the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach because Adam only had 6. So it's 7, it's called the mitzvot b'nei Noach because only by the sons of Noach did we hit the tally of 7. Only then did we get to 7 mitzvot, not before then. So we have a very basic debate here between our heavyweights, Rashi and Tosfot on one side, Ramban and Rambam, Nachmanides, Maimonides on the other side. Were Adam and Eve vegetarians? According to Rambam and Ramban, they were. No meat at all. And according to Rashi and Tosfot, they were not vegetarians, but they were they were pacifist in they would not take the life of a living animal. But if they didn't take its life, and nevertheless the meat was available to them, then they were allowed to eat that. This all changed during the time of Noach. So let's see those sources. Let me pull it down a little bit further for you over here. Right, so that's Bereshit 9, verses 2 and 3. This is after the flood. So God, speaking to Noach, says as follows: Umora achem, and your fear, vitchitchem, and your dread, fair enough, yihiyeh al kol chayat haaretz, will be upon all the beasts of the earth, v'al kol of hashamayim, and upon all that flies in the heavens, v'chol asher tzemos ha'adama, and upon all that swarms upon the earth, uv'chol digei hayam, and all the fish of the sea, biyedchem nitanu, into your hands, Noach and your descendants, they have been given. Kol remes, all that moves, asher hu chai, that is alive, lachem yihiyeh la'achla. That is for you to eat. They are there for you to eat. Ki yerek esev, like the green vegetation that had been permitted for you until now, natati lachem et kol. I've now given it all to you. According to Ramban, now, whereas before you were not allowed to eat it at all, now you can eat it, but there will be this limitation of not a limb from a living animal. According to Rashi, whereas before you were not allowed to kill an animal and eat it, now you can kill an animal and eat it. And no restrictions for Bnei Noach, no restrictions for the descendants of Noach in terms of which animals they can eat, in terms of how it would be prepared, slaughtered, prepared, no restrictions whatsoever. Now you can eat animals, as is the law for non-Jews. That even a Noahide has no restrictions on the food as long as it's not Aver min hachai, which is one of the 7 Noahide mitzvot. As long as it's not a limb from a living animal, anything at all a person wants to eat, it's all fair game. Right? No restrictions on what, no restrictions on how, it's all there. Why the change? Why did the Torah transition? And now all of a sudden with Noach, it's now either they're allowed to eat meat or they're allowed to kill and eat meat. But that which had been prohibited for them regarding the animals beforehand now has become permitted. Why is that? And for that we have the next source, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who gives us 3 approaches as to why this is the case. Good. And we have that both here in Hebrew and in English for you. So Or HaChaim writes as follows. Kol remes asher hu chai, all that which is swarming, I've given it to you to eat. Verse 3 said, like the green vegetation, it's yours. Yesh lada'at. We need to know, we need to understand. Lama lo hutar basar la'adam el l'noach. Why was meat not permitted to Adam, and yet it was permitted to Noach? V'nira, and it appears, it seems to me, ki Noach mishalo natnu lo. Noach, that which was his, was given to him. We'll soon see what he means by that. Does English even say that? Yeah. Noach mishalo nitnu lo. Noach, that which was his, was given to him. Legimel sibot. Why are we saying the animals were his, and therefore he's allowed now to partake of them? 3 approaches. Ha'aleph, number 1. Shebe'entza'uto matzah Hashem l'kayem hamin. It was only through him, in his merit, that God kept these species alive. Vizulato, were it not for him, lo hayimekayim min haremes below Adam. He would not have kept the animals were it not for Adam, mankind. Uvazeh zachahu bahem. And that's how he merited in them. All the animals only stayed alive because of him. And therefore, He now owns them, so to speak. He now has this dominion, this control over them, this ability to eat them, to kill them, to eat them. They owe their very existence to him, and therefore they are his. Now, some ask a question then in regard to fish. What would the question be in regard to fish, my friends? Don't be bashful.
You didn't save the fish.
Thank you. Again, Judy?
You did not save the fish. They were swimming around.
The fish were having a grand old time swimming around. They had greater mobility than they had before. The fish were doing just fine in the flood, right? So he did not save the lives of the fish. So as Judy is asking, there are those that ask according to that, why should he have been giving this dominion over the fish? He should have to be, I know there's a certain term for those who only eat fish. He would have to be the opposite of that, only eating meat, only eating insects perhaps, but fish should be off the menu. But actually, that would be a misinterpretation of the first approach. Because let's say there were no people who were worthy of being saved. So there was going to be a flood and a restart button, a complete restart button, with no vestiges of the old world, as in Noach and his family, to carry on. So if that's the case, God would not have maintained the world for the sake of the fish. So even though the fish would not have been destroyed in the flood, but the only reason the world continued with all that it was, the animals that were on the ark and the fish that were in the sea, is only because of Noach, because there were righteous mankind. Our view of the purpose of the world is that there is a being, a creation, humankind, that has the ability to recognize and to connect to God. In the absence of that, it all goes down. So the world would not have continued were it for the animals or for the fish. And therefore, Adam, as he said, Mishalo nitnulo, that which was his was given to him. He owns them, so to speak. And therefore he is given this rulership over them. Beth, number 2, Shuhu tarach bahem, v'yagav, he worked hard on their behalf. He became wearied, exhausted in the teva. Seva lamad kaman yigiot yigabahem. Go and see how difficult it was to take care of all these animals for the year. V'alav nemar, about him it says, Yagia kapecha ki tochal, the work of your hands, that is what you will have to eat. See, he toiled taking care of the animals, and therefore it was given to him that he will now be able to eat them. Once again, we have Judy's question that does not necessarily, that does not include the fish. He was not there throwing breadcrumbs out to the fish. They were doing just fine without Noach. But nevertheless, it would seem, according to this approach, once the animal kingdom was given to him, because of the work that he did to maintain the animals on the teva, on the ark, so all of the animal kingdom was given to him. Gimel, a third approach, shegaram be'emtsaut karbano, he's the one who caused, by the sacrifices that he brought afterwards, shenitratza Hashem, that God was, so to speak, pleased with mankind, v'nishba shelo yikaret kol basar, and swore that never again would all flesh be cut off. And therefore, He is the one who guaranteed their future. Ulazeh hitir lo Hashem, and that is why God permitted him le'echol mipri darko, to eat from the fruits of his actions. So the Orach Chaim gives three approaches as to why these animals were now his. Either because they were saved in his merit, either because he's the one who sustained them, or he's the one who gave them a future. Whatever the case is, it is clear that from the time of Noah and on, mankind is not commanded to be vegetarians. That is clear. So that is transition point number one. There was a second transition point, not necessarily for all of mankind, but for the children of Israel when it comes to meat. And let's see these verses. One second. There we go. Okay, now we are in the book of Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, and we're in the desert, and God is telling us what is going to be once we enter the land. Okay, everyone can see the new verses that I scrolled to Deuteronomy on the screen? So let's see. The pasuk says, Ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha et gevulcha. When God will widen your boundaries, kasher diber lach, as he has spoken to you, as he has told you that he will do. V'amarta, and you will say, ochla basar, I want to have some meat. Ki ta'ava nafshecha, ta'aveh nafshecha lechol basar. Because you have this ta'ava, this desire, this want, this lust to eat meat. You should know, b'chol avat nafshecha, tochal basar. You will be able to eat meat whenever you want, which seems to be saying that now in the desert, that's not the case. We'll soon see three approaches as to what changed. But when God will expand your boundary and you'll come to the land, then you will be able to eat meat as you desire. And in the land of Israel, ki yirchak mimcha hamakom, when you will be distant from the place, asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha lasum shemo sham, the place that God, Hashem your God, will choose to place his name there. V'zavachta mi bekarcha umitzoncha asher natan Hashem lecha kasher tziviticha. There you will bring the sacrifices, right? There, if you'll be distant from the place that Hashem has commanded you to right? Nevertheless, you can slaughter from your animals. V'achalta b'sharecha. You'll be able to slaughter animals and eat them in your cities. Meaning, even outside of that realm of bringing sacrifices to the temple, to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Mishkan initially, and then ultimately with Solomon, Shlomo's building, to the Beit HaMikdash. When you're bringing sacrifices to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, as it was temporary, or the Mikdash, the temple, as it was permanent, there you'll be able to eat meat. You'll slaughter it kasher tziviticha, very interesting. You'll slaughter it in the manner that I commanded you. But of course, nowhere in the written Torah do we have any instruction as to how they should be slaughtered. And from here we learn out that we see clearly that there was an oral Torah that accompanied the written Torah. where the explanations of how to slaughter, of what is the pre-Eitz Hadar that we call an etrog, what is the sukkah that we call the sukkah, what is the tefillin? The Torah calls it an ot on your hand and a totafot between your eyes. What are the tefillin? We see here that the Torah shebichtav, the written Torah, references the oral Torah. References, you'll slaughter it like I commanded you, even though there's no command again written in the written Torah. But getting back to our point, things will change once you get to Israel. Pasuk 20, verse 20, Chaf, spoke about eating whenever you desire. 21 spoke about eating out of the context of the sacrifices that you bring to the place, but sacrificing and slaughtering, and eating in all of your cities whenever you want. So clearly there was a transition that's taking place as we go from the midbar, from the desert, into, after the 40 years there, into the land of Israel. What is this transition that took place? So to that, let's see the Rashi first, which you have on your sheets, and then we'll see the Sifri, who offers three different opinions amongst the sages, and we'll see where we go from there. So Rashi says as follows. Do you have that? Yes, good. Rashi, the left-hand side over here. Ki archiv, when God will spread out your boundary. And you'll say, let me eat basar. I'd like to eat the meat. Eat according to your desire. Rashi says, the Torah teaches the proper rule. Limda Torah derech eretz. The Torah is teaching you proper derech eretz. Shelo yitaveh adam le'achol basar, that a person should not have a desire to eat flesh, to eat meat. Ela mitoch rachvat yadayim, only if he has wide hands in abundance, ve'osher, and wealth. Otherwise, you can pass on the meat. The second Rashi, b'chol avat nafshecha, whenever you want, you can eat the meat. We said there, verse 21, you may eat in your cities, slaughter as I commanded you, and eat in your cities according to your desires. Rashi says, b'chol avat nafshecha, aval b'midbar, nasar lahem basar chulin. Ela in kain makdisha umakriva shlamim. Oh, Rashi understands what changed. In the midbar, in the desert, we were only allowed to eat meat within that realm of a sacrifice. You brought a sacrifice. Some sacrifices were completely consumed on the altar. Other sacrifices, part of the meat would go to the Kohanim, to the priests. And others, part of it would go to the priests, always some on the altar, some to the priests, the Kohanim, and some to the owners. So Rashi is understanding these verses as saying, whereas until then, you were all in the midbar, in the desert, you were only allowed to eat meat within the context of sacrifices. Once you enter the land of Israel, many of you will be very far from the Mishkan where it will be situated, or from the Mishkan, or from the Mikdash, the temple where it will be built. There you'll be allowed to eat meat, even not within the context of sacrifices. So that is, Rashi is quoting one of the three opinions that the Sifri brings. Let's learn the Sifri. The Sifri is not translated into English, but that's why I'm here. I'll do the translation as we go through it. The Sifri, which is one of the Medrash on the Torah, says, V'amarta ochla basar ki taveh nafshecha l'chol basar. You will say, I will eat meat, because you have this desire to eat meat. Rabbi Yisroel Omer Magid, Rabbi Yisroel is of the opinion, Magid shebasar tava nesa lehem liyisrael b'midbar, meat for just my own pleasure, outside of sacrificial meat, was prohibited in the midbar. Once we came to the land, that became permitted, which is the way that Rashi learned. So the transition of verses 20 and 21 is, in the midbar, you could only eat sacrificial meat. Once we enter the land of Israel, you'd be allowed to have your own barbecue, slaughter the meat, and eat it, not within the context of sacrifice. Rabbi Akiva Omer lo ba'akotel lamed ela mitzvot hamurot kan. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the Torah is only teaching us the mitzvot that are stated here. Le'asor lehen basar nechira. What does this pasuk introduce, he says? It introduces slaughtering. So according to Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Yishmael, things became more allowed. We became more lax once we entered the land of Israel. In the desert, only sacrificial meat. In Israel, greater allowance, even non-sacrificial meat. Rabbi Akiva says the opposite. What did it introduce over here? Slaughtering, shchita. Meaning, beforehand, in the desert, we didn't have to slaughter the animals in order to eat them. However, we would kill them. We're allowed to eat animals once they're dead. Of course, not a limb from a living animal, but once they're dead, we're allowed to eat them, no matter how they died or no matter how we killed them. Basar nechira means meat that was not properly slaughtered. That was allowed in the desert. Once we enter Israel, there's less of an allowance. Now continue to eat meat. So according to Rabbi Akiva, non-sacrificial meat was allowed in the desert and it didn't need to be slaughtered. Now you're entering the land of Israel, non-sacrificial meat can be eaten, but only if it will be slaughtered. Lozman Azariah Omer, the third opinion, Lo ba'akasav elalamei derech eretz. It's not teaching me any new dinim, any new laws. In the desert, sacrificial and non-sacrificial meat was eaten through slaughtering. In Israel, sacrificial and non-sacrificial meat could be eaten through slaughtering. So what is it telling us over here? It's teaching us proper behavior. It's teaching us derech eretz. Shelo yochal adam basar ela l'te'avon. A person should only be eating meat if he has a strong desire for it. Right? Yochal, I think a person just takes some meat to eat it. No, you should slaughter it. But, right, it should be only, right, from your animals. Don't gorge. Don't be a glutton. And we'll see the last sources we'll see today, we'll continue next week, are along those lines. The Rambam, Maimonides, well, first the Gemara Chulin, the Talmud, says, Limda Torah derech eretz lo yochel basar ela te'avon. You should eat when you have a desire for it. And Rambam says, we'll go straight to the English of the Rambam, which you have over here. When the Jews were journeying through the desert, they were not commanded to slaughter non-sacrificial animals. Right? This is like Rabbi Akiva's opinion, the second opinion. Instead, they would cut off their heads or slaughter them and eat as the other nations do. In the desert, they were commanded that everyone who desires to slaughter an animal in the prescribed way should slaughter only for the sake of a peace offering. When a man from the house of Israel will slaughter an ox, he will not bring it to the tent of meeting, be considered as spilled blood. So the children will bring their sacrifices and slaughter as peace offerings. So in the desert, the Rambam says, you can eat any meat you wanted. But if it was slaughtered, it needed to be brought as a sacrifice. Otherwise, kill it however you want. And if a person desired to cut an animal's head off, partake of the animal of the desert, this was allowed. So the Rambam there in the laws of shechita, the laws of slaughtering, brings in Rabbi Akiva's view, not like the Rashi that we saw before. And Rabbi Akiva's view is that animals non-slaughtered will be allowed to be eaten in the desert. Nevertheless, the Rambam in his Hilchot Deot, laws of personal refinement and development, there he brings in this idea of being selective and not gorging oneself in meat. He says a Torah sage manages his financial affairs judiciously. He eats, drinks, provides for his household in accordance with his funds and degree of success without overtaxing, overburdening himself. The sage have directed us regarding the ways of the world. The person should eat meat only with appetite, as it says, if his soul should crave, desire meat. It is sufficient for the healthy to eat meat once weekly, from Sabbath Eve, meaning Friday night, to Sabbath Eve. If he is wealthy enough to eat meat every day, he may. And listen to this beautiful statement of the Rambam. The sages have also directed us, saying, one should always eat less than befits his income, dress as befits his income, and provide for wife and children beyond what befits his income. So the eating we could be less with, eat less, eat under your means, dress according to your means in a dignified manner, take care of your wife and children beyond your means. Make sure that there you go overboard when it comes to taking care of wife and children. So we see clearly at this point, and we'll pick up next week with where we go from here in terms of how the Torah and different views view vegetarianism. And as could we well be imagined, there is a range of views, right? Amongst the rabbis, different views. Who would ever have thought that could happen? But there are different views. But clearly, according to everyone, Adam was limited. So there was, and according to some, completely vegetarian. It became allowed for Noah, and from that point on, in the desert, as we transitioned to the land of Israel, changes came about. According to some, it was a diminishing of, it was a greater allowance, according to Rabbi Yisroel and Rashi, who brings that opinion, that now you could eat even beyond sacrificial meat. According to others, before that, sacrificial meat did not need to be slaughtered. A non-sacrificial meat could be eaten, but was not slaughtered. Once we enter the land of Israel, it all must be slaughtered. But there also is, and this will impact greatly on next week's class, there also is this idea of slow down, of not eating so much. Hold back on it, which would seem to indicate that there is a value in abstaining from it. We use the term ta'ava nafshecha, desires. Now, ta'avot, we usually try to control our ta'avot. We try to control our desires. We don't just give in to desires. So I think the stage is set that we see this somewhat ambiguity when it comes to the Torah's approach towards eating animals, and therefore the Torah's approach towards vegetarianism. So next week, please God, I'm going to be away the first part of next week. There won't be classes Monday, Tuesday. Natalie and I are going in for our son to New York for our son's engagement. But I'm coming back Wednesday night, so we will have our lunch and learn next week on Thursday to complete this, to see how the different views take this ambiguity that the Torah has given us when it comes to eating meat, and we'll see how that translates into practice today amongst amongst the Jewish people, amongst those who the Torah viewpoint on this is important, but they also have their own sense, but I don't want to eat meat. How does that line up? So we'll see that next week, my friends. Okay, let me wish everybody a good Shabbos, a Shabbat Shalom, and forward to seeing all of you next week when we will continue with this topic. Okay? Shavua
Thank
Tov,
you.
everybody. Good Shabbos, good week,
Shabbat Shalom.
and best regards. Okay.
Bye.